Wow, what a beautiful, beautiful anthem. Thank you so much, choir, for that inspiring message and song. It was just a week ago that we started our Lenten Bible study on caring for others God's ways, caring for others God's way. And so it's appropriate that we lift up this text this morning from Luke, dealing with our attitude of compassion towards others. I remember a number of years ago receiving a phone call from a church family, and they said, "Pastor, would you be so kind as to go by the Oklahoma City County Jail? Our daughter got arrested last night, adult daughter." I went by to see her after going through quite a bit of hullabaloo trying to get my credentials certified and getting me in, only to find out that indeed this young lady had gotten caught up in kind of a process of making fake IDs, forging checks, and a variety of other things that gotten herself in a lot of trouble. I was able to visit with her, have a prayer with her. But as I went away from the jail, I thought to myself, how did she get herself into this situation? How did she get herself into this mess? Now, I don't know about you, but I'll just make a confession this morning. Sometimes there are people and circumstances that I don't understand. Sometimes there are people and circumstances, to be all honest, kind of irritate me. And maybe you've had that same experience. Maybe you've had dealings with people and their behaviors, their attitudes, their actions are a little bit disappointing. And maybe you come away from there saying to yourself something like, can't they do better than that? Don't they know better than that? How did they get themselves into this mess? How did they let this happen? And I just think sometimes it's easier for me, and maybe you can identify with this a little bit, to find myself being critical and judgmental of others rather than having kind of a heart and a mind of compassion. But when we look at Luke chapter 6 today, verses 37 to 42, he speaks to us about not having judgmental attitudes. He speaks to us about having a kind of an attitude of mercy and living towards others in a lifestyle of compassion. He does this in some ways, beginning in this passage, with just direct instructions, do not judge and you will not be judged. And then he goes on and gives kind of a parable. We'll look at this later about a blind man and what happens when the blind lead the blind. They lead each other astray. And then he goes into some illustrations about having something in your eye and how difficult that can be. But in all of these admonitions and these instructions and these parables, he's talking about what it means for us to live in a spirit of compassion towards others and to really care about others. Last week in our Caring for People God's Way class, we looked at just a variety of scriptures in terms of the people to whom God calls us to care for, express care for. And it was quite a list. It included the weak, the widow, those who are victims of circumstances, those who have been caught up in moral failure, the poor and the outcast, those who are described in Titus as having urgent need, those who are sad or have had loss and are grieving. And the kind of expressions or injunctions that were given are these: to bear with those who are failing, to care for them, to carry the burdens of others, to tend to physical needs, to share with others in their loss, to extend comfort unto them. And it's again very clear that Jesus is consistent with the rest of Scripture and that God is calling us as His children, as we have received mercy, to be people who have an attitude of mercy towards others. As we who are people who have received the Lord's grace and compassion, we are to live in a spirit of compassion. And three very simple rules or guidelines are given to us in these verses. First of all, look at verse 37. Now, it's written in a kind of a negative way: do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. I think a more positive way to put that is that we are to be accepting of others. Not judging of others, not condemning of others, but accepting of others. In fact, he goes on in an illustration a little bit later. In verse 31, he says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in someone else's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say, friend, let me take the speck out of your eye when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye. You hypocrite, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will be able to take the speck out of the other person's eye. We are to live in a spirit of acceptance. Now let me say very clearly that living in a spirit of acceptance does not mean that we approve of other situations, that we endorse their attitudes or their actions or their lifestyle, or that we do things that will enable them in patterns that are destructive. Acceptance does not mean enablement. It does not mean endorsement. It does not necessarily mean approval of, but it is a realization that as human beings we all share in kind of a common journey, and that common journey is that we all have something with which we are struggling. We all have something with which we are dealing with. And if we're aware that in our own life there are issues that we are dealing with, it gives us a greater sense of understanding and compassion of others in their struggles of life. It doesn't say that we approve of what they're doing, but it gives us a different attitude in terms of how we relate to them and how we try to reach out to them. And when he gives this illustration of a speck in the eye, I can really identify with this. Let me tell you, I wear a gas perm corrective contact lens, very severe corrective contact lens. It's a gas perm lens. It's what's called a rigid gas perm lens. And there are times when working, sometimes even just walking around, especially if I'm doing yard work, somehow some dust or something will get into my eye. I want to tell you, that is painful. That really hurts. It'll start making my eye watering. It will cloud my vision. All of a sudden I do not see things clearly. And I realize that really sometimes if I'm out working in the yard, I just have to turn off the lawnmower, go in the house, take the contact out, wash it, clean it, rinse out my eye before I can really get on to the tasks that I'm trying to do and do them in an effective way. When we've got something in our eye, it clouds our vision and makes us ineffective in carrying on the tasks that are before. It's the same way in terms of our spirit. It's the same way in terms of our relationships with others. When there is something in our own eye that we need to deal with, it makes us hard to see clearly the situations and concerns of others. But also, let me just tell you, because of the discomfort that can cause, it gives me a lot of compassion when I see others. My son is one also who does lawn work. He doesn't wear the gas perm lenses. He's got the other kind of contact lenses. But he says, Dad, sometimes I have to do my lawn work with my glasses on, because if I'm wearing my contacts and something gets in my eye, he says, I just can't finish the job. So I have compassion on others who have the same kind of annoying experience. And there's something about when we realize our own inconsistencies, our own struggles, our own challenges in life, that changes not necessarily our perspective, but it changes our attitude and the way we deal with, reach out to, and really embrace and accept others, even when they find themselves in circumstances, sometimes by their own choices, sometimes by their own decisions, by their own processes, find themselves in some kind of difficulty. But Jesus goes beyond this. He says not only should we live in a spirit of acceptance with others, he said we should forgive others. And I cannot begin to tell you how much this is at the heart of our faith, that we live in a spirit of forgiveness one towards the other. He says, forgive and you will be forgiven. It echoes the words of the very prayer, the Lord's Prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. Forgiveness is at the heart of our faith. It's at the heart of our relationship with others. And why is that so important? It's because sometimes when we are harboring resentment, when we are harboring bitterness, even if we're harboring bitterness towards maybe this person over here or somebody from years ago, maybe it's a situation that took place years ago, we're not even in contact or fellowship with that person. Maybe there's been a breaking off of that. When there's a kind of a resentment between us and others, somehow that resentment, it tends to kind of splash over. it kinds to spill over. When resentment and bitterness is in our heart, and we allow, as the writer of Hebrews says, for a root of bitterness to take hold within our life, it begins to affect our attitude and our perspective towards others. I mean, it's just kind of amazing. Someone told me the other day in one of our classes that Reverend Tommy Harrison at Asbury Church once said that lack of forgiveness or resentment is like taking poison and hoping that the other person will die. I'd never heard that before, but I really like that. So it's like us drinking poison, thinking, I'm going to get even with that person, but really what it's doing is damaging us. It's damaging our own spirit. I remember a pastor friend of mine telling me one day, kind of a miracle. He said, Alan, there's a man in my church and a kind of a miracle has happened. He said he has struggled with his health, with his mental health, with his attitude for years. He's been kind of estranged from his adult son. Things have not gone well in their life. But he said recently, through a miraculous work of God, God moved in both of their hearts. They forgave each other. They've been reunited. They've been reconciled. I said, well, what's so amazing about that? He said, Alan, I can't believe the change that has taken place in this man's life. He said it's not only just in his general attitude and his countenance, which is much more joy-filled and much lighter, etc. He said you could even see it on his face. He said he used to go around and his face was kind of red. He said, I don't know if it's a blood pressure deal or what, but there was a kind of a rootiness to his face and kind of a tenseness. And he said you can see this change through his whole being. His physical countenance has changed because forgiveness has become real to him, and he has offered that to his son and his son towards him. He said it has changed not only his relationships, but his attitudes, the way he's getting along with others in the church, and his own personal health. He said you can just see it. It's like he kind of radiates joy now, where before this resentment had its grip upon him. So living in a spirit of compassion towards others. And I see this again and again in the life of Jesus, where it says Jesus saw the needs of others. He observed the needs of others. And it says he was moved with compassion. And then when you look at that sequence, it says Jesus got involved. He got involved in trying to help. And that's exactly what this passage says. It says, do not judge and you will not be judged. In other words, be accepting of others. Do not condemn and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. But then he says, no, we must put compassion into action. Compassion is more than just an attitude. Look what he says in verse 38. He says, give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running down, will be poured into your lap. For the measure you use, it will be measured to you. He says we not only accept others and forgive others, but we give to them to help them in their circumstances. We give to them as best we can to try to help them and assist them with whatever need or issue that they're dealing with in their life. And you know, there are other passages that go along with this passage where it says we're to pray for our enemies. Well, that's kind of different. Jesus was kind of radical in it. We should pray for those who we really see as kind of enemies. We are to give to those who persecute us, to those who are being evil to Jesus. Said, Father, forgive them. He forgave them because they do not know what they do. And the kind of giving that we give to others out of a spirit of compassion can take many, many forms. It might be a material gift where we have compassion upon them and we side in a monetary way or in some very specific material way. We give something to them to help alleviate their need and to lift the burden that they're carrying. It might just be a gift of time. It might just be that they need someone to spend time with them, to hang out with them, to listen to them. Might be a gift of listening and understanding. Might be a gift of encouragement, just lifting up to them a sense of encouragement that everything is going to be okay. It might be a gift of wisdom or experience or a word of guidance or something. But in some way we get involved through compassion in the lives of others, and we do what we can to alleviate the suffering or the need which they are experiencing. I've shared this story in the past. I want to lift it up once again. It's just such a powerful story. It's about a couple named Jim and Karen. They were members of my church in Seminole. And they were probably in their 40s when this story happened. And they had gone up to Red River, New Mexico for a trip. Up there on a trip, had a wonderful time at Red River, were making their way back to Oklahoma, making their way back to Seminole. And as they were coming out of Red River and down through the Cimarron area, etc., they noticed a car alongside of the road, and there was an elderly couple out. They had the hood up. Obviously something was wrong with the car, and they were stuck. And they drove by. They noticed, oh, there's some people with car trouble, and they had a brief conversation. It looked like kind of an older couple as well. And Jim slowed the car down and says, we need to go back and check on them. And they went back, and lo and behold, the car had broken down. It had some kind of problems. And so they had called for the roadside assistance, who came, told them they were going to have to take that car to get it fixed all the way to Amarillo. How are they going to get there? So Jim and Karen, who are on their way back to Seminole, and if you look at a map, Amarillo is not exactly on the way, but they said, get in, let's get your luggage, let's get you in the car. Followed the pickup truck towing the broken down vehicle to Amarillo, and there they said it's going to take, spent the night, and we're told we're going to have to order some parts. It's going to be 5 days. The couple, they found out, lived in Elk City. Well, now they're on I-40, and they said, listen, that's on our way back to Seminole. And the man said, if you can get us back to Elk City 5 days and my car is fixed, my son will bring me back, we can pick up the car. So they took them to Elk City, dropped them off. Through that experience, they became fast friends with this couple. In fact, 2 years later, when they experienced their 60th wedding anniversary, they invited Jim and Karen to come and be a part of the blessing of that experience. And I remember, and they were blessed by it. They came by and said, well, we got back a day later than we thought, but we've made such wonderful friends, and it was such a wonderful feeling to feel like we were able to stop and assist someone along the way. And I said, what led you? What was speaking to you when you did that? And they said, we looked and we saw the couple, and we kind of looked at their age. And they looked about the age of our parents, and they said, you know, the thought that went through our mind, if that was our parents there, how we would hope that somebody would stop and assist our parents and help them along. And God just spoke to us, and we went back, and we had a wonderful, wonderful experience. Why? Because they saw, their hearts were moved with compassion, and they gave of their time. Really, you know, some money was probably involved in terms of the extra gas and mileage on the trip. But more importantly, they gave of themselves. They gave of their love. They gave of their concern. They gave of their encouragement. They helped them along that way. Jesus was a man who lived in a spirit of compassion. And my guess is, if you are anything like me, there are situations, there are circumstances, there are people that just try your patience, and at times you think, oh Lord, you know, what do I do? And maybe that's God knocking on the door of our hearts saying, I know what you do. You find the grace of God to have patience with these circumstances, patience with these people, but more than that, to accept them. If necessary, if there's been some offense, to forgive them. As God is leading you to give unto them in a way that can help them and lift them up and move them on in life's journey, because that's exactly what God in Christ has done for you and me. Thanks be to God. Amen.